All right, we're going to talk about Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a very sad disease. When we talk about Alzheimer's, basically you have neurofibril tangles. So basically, when you have neurofibril tangles, all your neurons are going to be tangled up. But other things associated with Alzheimer's is going to be senile plaques. And basically you degenerate your cortical neurons. So when we say cortical neurons, we're talking about your cerebral cortex areas. So especially your association areas. So when you degenerate your cortical neurons, you basically damage your cerebral association areas. Your cortex is the outer portion. The association is anything associated with memory, so you don't recognize people when you see them. You don't recognize objects. You don't hear songs and recognize them anymore. Anytime you say association areas, you're losing your memory. But you're also going to damage the limbic system, which is involved with memory, specifically the hippocampus. So you get basically plaques deep within the cerebrum, and so you can't convert short-term memory to long-term anymore. So some of your memory is going to be retained, but they're also very emotional. So the medicines that people are getting for Alzheimer's disease can make them very emotional. My experience with Alzheimer's, I worked at a senior citizen place in Midland when I was in school, and when someone had Alzheimer's disease, they had husbands that they didn't recognize anymore, that they called their dad. But the medicine and a combination of the disease changed their personalities. So what I've commonly heard is that someone who's a very sweet person, when they get Alzheimer's, can be very mean and hateful. I mean, it's not always the case, but someone who is very mean and hateful in their normal life end up being very nice and sweet. And that was most cases, people that knew them, that's what they would tell me. So Alzheimer's is going to damage your cortical association areas, which you've learned. This is very, very common, and a lot of you are going into the nursing field. You're going to have to at some point get your CNA, and you'll see quite a bit of this. So we're actually moving on to the cerebellum. When we talk about the cerebellum is the second largest portion of the brain in general. And the cerebellum, we can see on a picture, several pictures that we've already drawn. So we're going to cover the cerebellum. It is the second largest division of the brain. The first largest would be your cerebrum. So we're just going to add it onto this one because we can. So we can say cerebrum, and now we're going to talk about the cerebellum. That's a division. What color to write in? I'm running out of color options. I'm going to use purple to discuss the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum is very close to this brain stem. So the brain stem is connected to the spinal cord. So we have sensory neurons that are going to travel up to the cerebrum, to the cerebral cortex areas, but we have motor that's going to travel down. So the cerebellum is going to have to be able to integrate sensory information, but it's also needing to communicate with the cerebrum. We have to have a ways to communicate. So the cerebellum will communicate with the cerebrum through the brain stem. Now, I'm just going to give its functions, but when we talk about the brain stem is going to function in relaying sensory information up and motor information down, but it's also going to communicate with the cerebellum. Now, the functions of the cerebellum. It is going to integrate sensory information regarding body position. So you can basically close your eyes and know if you're standing or sitting. You can know if your hand is flat on the table or closed in a fist. So you know where your body is in space even with your eyes closed. You don't have to see it to know where your body position is. So you know your body position. Now your cerebellum is also going to coordinate complex motor movements. So we're going to do some tests so that you can actually test your cerebellum. One test that I learned in school is where you ask a patient to hold one hand out and you tell them that they have to take their hand and take it over like this. So this is a way to check your cerebellum. Now, the best way to check your cerebellum is to close your eyes, and you would do that with both hands. That's one way to test the cerebellum. So your cerebellum, there is two sides of it, so you have to check both right and left. Your cerebellum, another way to check it is, again, body position. You close your eyes, you have your arms out in front of you, and you try to touch your fingers together. You should be able to do that with your eyes closed. That's a complex motor movement that is involving, body position, where you basically have your arms out and you try to close your eyes and you try to put your fingers together in front of you with your arms completely stretched out. So sometimes you'll pass point like that. That could mean that you have something wrong with your cerebellum, but most people can do it. So that's one way to test the cerebellum. Now, a complex motor movement also involves walking. So an example, a very big one for the complex motor movement is it's going to control walking. And another word for walking in anatomy is your gait. So that's an example of a complex motor movement. But it also is going to maintain your posture. So if you damage the cerebellum, that's very, very bad. Damage to the cerebellum if it controls complex motor movements, you're not going to be able to walk. You're not going to have accurate motor movements. So again, you wouldn't be able to control that. You would have inaccurate movements. So I don't know what that would look like. I've never seen a positive case, but I have to test it as a chiropractor. But when they walk, they're going to look like they're drunk. So this is one way that you can get out of like getting pulled over for drinking, is saying that you have damage to your cerebellum. However, your eyes go back and forth when you're drunk. Your cerebellum, your eyes stay fixed. So that's one way that law enforcement can get you. So when you have damage to your cerebellum, you have tremors, inaccurate movements, of voluntary muscles. So you don't move right. You lose your muscle tone. We say that you have an uneven gait. Uneven gait means walking. So uneven gait means you can't walk right. And if you close your eyes when you're checking the cerebellum, because it helps maintain your posture, you have loss of equilibrium. So that's what would happen if you damaged your cerebellum. So the cerebellum is actually pretty easy. The cerebrum is very hard. We talked a lot about the cerebrum. The cerebellum, this is it for the cerebellum. Now we're about to cover all of the diencephalon, which has quite a few things, and the brainstem, which also has quite a few things. But the cerebellum, that's it for the cerebellum. Know the cerebellum and its functions and damage. These are the functions.